like to talk about some of the lessons I've learned during the creation of this video series. The most important one is stay organized. As I mentioned in the very first intro video, SimNotes should be in any form that works for you, text files, or keep your code in a code editor or a spreadsheet. Just organize. And always version your Vellum.io cache and as the same version of your HIP, as the same version of your renders, as the same version of your movies. Everything should have the same version as the HIP. As far as PDG goes, early tests of collisions I did on the body were failing, and I couldn't figure out why, and I went up and down my setup and couldn't figure out why it was working in SOPs and not working in TOPs. The PDG process, though, eventually I did get it working. The problem with it is that it's a linear process, and I had to wait for each sim to finish before the next sim would begin. So I had to wait almost a week for all of the wedges that I was looking for. I came back and looked at all the movies, and none of them really differed that much, so I felt like I wasted a lot of time. It's better for a shorter, smaller clip with a shorter run-up, going to the position or the motion that is causing you problem. So that would be a much better solution. And you can use something like Studio Library to store the problem animation sequence or the problem animation location and go straight from like a rest pose directly into that in maybe a 30 frame, 40 frame snippet. So check out studiolibrary.com. Also, if you work for a studio or your studio has a farm, or if you have a budget to investigate other ways to wedge, like AWS, Deadline, that'll help you free up your machine and help you iterate more. I did try grid markets, and just to say I'm not being paid for this, it was easy and fast to set up and get going, but I was far along enough in this video series that I no longer needed it for what I was doing. Where PDG was super useful for me was creating a lot of movies of my simulations. So I did install ImageMagick, and was able to use that to just offline the creations of my movies. So here's an example of one of the wedge movies that I made. I did a simple Intagma setup where I had it create a collage for me as well, and I was using Mantra to render, so it was not very fast. This is before Karma came out, so it was incredibly slow to do any of this stuff. But PDG was useful for creating movies for my processes. I've simmed a lot of straps, ropes, belts, etc. over the years in many different dynamic solvers. Belts or very long, thin strips of dynamic material are very difficult in any solver because spring energies don't have any neighboring springs to dissipate the energy into like a larger swath of cloth, like a cloak. You have to take time to find the sweet spots where all of the constraints work well together with their settings. I tried a lot of versions of setups with the belts on this project. Single-sided cloth, remeshed volumes with struts, TET meshes, etc. And each came out with its own challenges and disappointments. In the future, I'll probably set up belts, hoses, straps, and other long, thin meshes with cloth and struts. They're very fast, and they're very stable. Density and mass. This goes back to organization. Please organize. In general, I should have paid more attention to the density settings on my meshes because it affected collisions later. Once I combined all of my setups into a single setup, I had to complete another iteration of setup tweaking on each individual setup to get the masses back into the same original ballpark before things started looking right. As you progress, try and keep track of your minimum and maximum mass values in a spreadsheet for each object being simmed. As a general rule, try and keep masses in the same general value zone. 0.1 and 1 to the minus 8th are too divergent and collisions will look bad. 1 to the minus 6th and 1 to the minus 8th are much closer, and collisions can be adjusted with the layer shock setting on the solver. Thoughts on constraints. First of all, the pin to target. Use it sparingly, with the lowest stiffness you need to achieve your desired results, because it requires that the source animation quality is very high. So make sure you verify the input before relying on this. But also, if you use very high values of this, it will not play well with collisions and you'll get spiking. The attached to geometry constraint. Low levels of this can be an excellent way to tame unruly sims, as you've seen. I used it to hold the top shirt flaps back down by the thighs. I use this a lot on the belts and on the cloak and various locations to kind of dial in what I wanted and where I wanted the points of a mesh to be at a specific time. These are super useful constraints and they're quick to sim. And with the new tangent constraint, I find it super useful to be able to pull items back to a specific location. This helps maybe replace the need for a pin to target constraint. And it plays very well with collisions. It's my go-to solution. Bend stiffness. bend stiffness exists on a lot of the vellum constraints, and high values can cause unstable sims and vibrations. Try to use the lowest values you can to dial it in. So increasing mass will help bend stiffness be stronger, which will allow you to lower the values. But that also forces you to increase mass, which will affect collisions. Increasing smoothing iterations on the solver can help with these vibrations. Just be careful with this. Tetrahedral meshes. Usually good for gelatinous material, not really ideal for belts, as I thought it would be. Make sure to turn on surface triangles if you're going to use this, so that you can help tighten up the behavior of stretching. And use the bend and distance constraint to hold it together. But they're very simulation heavy constraints, and if you can achieve the same look with the struts and cloth replacement, please do so. There are many other lessons learned during the creation of this video series, but I tried to incorporate them into the actual videos themselves by re-recording the videos. And last but not least, I'd like to say thank you. Thank you for purchasing this, and if you have any suggestions that you would like to pass along, feel free to do so. Thank you.